Galaxy Empire horrified. You mean that wasn't their full army? The light in the reception hall was soft gold, the kind that event coordinators dial in deliberately, warm enough to make the carved stone walls of the New Hope Colonial Administration building look like something worth celebrating. 300 guests, imported flowers from the hydroponics deck, a governor who had spent 6 weeks drafting a speech about coexistence. The Racthal fleet arrived during the soup course. They did not knock. They did not signal on the diplomatic frequency. 47 warships dropped out of transit in low orbit, and the first thing anyone on the surface heard was the emergency locator tone cutting across every comm channel at once, that flat, cycling beep that colonial emergency manuals described as alert condition amber, but that everyone alive knew meant we have no plan for this. Governor Thays set down his spoon. He did not stand. He sat very still, the way people sit when they are running options and finding none of them good. His aide leaned down and said something in his ear. The governor's face did not change. He reached for his water glass instead, drank half of it, and set it back precisely where it had been. That was the wrong detail, not the fleet. The water glass set back in its exact ring. The broadcast came 40 seconds later. It cut across the hall's ambient music, a string quartet that had been playing something old and European, and replaced it with the voice of High Provost Vane of the Racthal hegemony. The voice was deep and unhurried, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had never once been interrupted. New Hope Colonial Administration. This transmission is for your official record. Effective immediately, New Hope is under hegemony administrative jurisdiction pending resource and sovereignty review. All outgoing transmissions are suspended. Your defense assets, such as they are decommissioned by order of the Central Lattice. You are a footnote in our ledger. Cease the pretense of sovereignty. The quartet had stopped. One of the musicians was still holding her bow in the air. Governor Thays put his napkin on the table. He stood. He looked around the room at 300 people who were waiting for him to say something that would make this manageable, and he said, very quietly, "I need everyone to remain calm." No one did. Stay close. What you're about to hear is not the story the hegemony filed. It is the one they buried. The Racthal hegemony had been in existence for 1,200 years. That was not a figure they advertised. It was simply understood, the way the size of a mountain is understood. They had absorbed 400 systems in that time, most of them without sustained resistance, because the math of resistance against the hegemony was not complicated. Their central lattice command network connected every ship, every station, every relay point in their territory into a single coordinated structure. You could not jam it. You could not spoof it. Every node authenticated every other node in real time. The lattice was the hegemony's actual weapon, not the ships. The ships were just what the lattice moved. They had learned, over 12 centuries, that species with inferior communications infrastructure always lost. The species that survived longest were the ones who understood this early and stopped fighting. Humanity had gone quiet the moment the first Racthal survey probe entered the Sol system, 21 years before the night of the gala. The hegemony had logged that quiet as compliance. Director Elena Vance was not at the gala. She was in a subterranean facility 200 kilometers from the nearest city, in a room that had no windows and smelled of recycled air and the faint iron tang of old server racks. She had a mug of coffee going cold on the corner of her desk. She had not touched it in an hour. The emergency locator tone was playing on her monitor too, same amber alert, same flat cycling beep. She watched the fleet's signature on the orbital display, 47 ships. She had expected between 40 and 50, close enough. She picked up the cold coffee, drank it anyway and set it back down. Beside the mug on the desk's surface was a single physical key card, plain white, no markings. The kind of card that looked like a hotel access pass from 50 years ago, which was approximately the point. The Racthal had never encountered an analog key protocol in active operational use. They did not file it in their intelligence assessments of human technology. It had not occurred to them to look. She did not pick up the card yet. Instead, she pulled up a personnel file, scrolled to a name, and read it for a long moment. Then she closed the file and opened a new window, a comm channel, encrypted on a frequency the hegemony's lattice did not monitor, because the hegemony's lattice had been built to monitor radio frequency transmissions, and this channel used a line-of-sight laser link between underground relay points. It was slow. It was limited. It had taken 3 years to build. 14 years ago, when the program began, they had needed something the lattice could not see. They had built it from scratch, underground, using materials sourced from projects the hegemony had no reason to track. Vance opened the channel and typed 4 words, "New Hope is confirmed." She waited. 12 seconds later, from a relay point 2,000 kilometers away, a response came back. "Ledger Phase 2, standing by." She closed the channel and looked at the key card again. Not yet. The hegemony's processing of New Hope took 3 days. They were efficient about it. Vane's staff had done this before, and the procedure was practiced. The Colonial Administration building was secured. Governor Thays and his senior staff were placed under what the hegemony's filing system called Administrative Detention Pending Jurisdiction Review, which was a phrase that meant something specific and unpleasant, and took about 6 months to resolve in the cases where it was resolved at all. The residents of New Hope were not harmed. The hegemony was not interested in harming them. Harming them would have created paperwork. The hegemony was interested in the colony's rare earth extraction operations, its transit position on the outer shipping lane, and its data infrastructure, which Vane's technical staff began integrating into the central lattice on day 2. That integration was the thing they had been counting on. Vane himself reviewed the technical report on New Hope's existing communication systems, the colonial relay network, the packet switching nodes, the legacy protocols that Earth's early colonial expansion had left running because replacing them was expensive and they still worked. He read the assessment twice. Then he tapped his console once, his habitual gesture when he had finished processing something and found it beneath further attention. Obsolete packet switching architecture, the report read. Recommend lattice overlay. No resistance anticipated. Indigenous encryption, negligible. He approved the integration order. He did not ask what the packet switching architecture was running. He did not ask because, in 1,200 years and 400 systems, no species had ever put anything useful inside a legacy communication protocol that the hegemony was about to absorb. The assumption was reasonable. It was also the assumption Vance had been building toward for 14 years. Back on Earth in the underground facility, Vance received the integration confirmation 6 hours after Vane signed the order. She read it twice, the way she read everything twice. Then she set it aside and pulled up a very long document, a running log that began 14 years ago and had not been shared with anyone outside a group of 11 people. The last entry read, Phase 2 integration, New Hope node accepted, lattice absorption initiated, protocol dormancy active. Ledger penetration, 94% of surveyed nodes. She read the number again. 94%. She had wanted 90. She had planned for 90. 94 was what happened when you had 14 years and patience as your primary tool. She did not celebrate. She opened a new entry and wrote, Day 5110, New Hope node absorbed, integration confirmed, dormancy holding, no detection, awaiting full propagation window estimated 8 to 12 days. Then she closed the log, turned off her monitor, and went to find something to eat that was not cold coffee. She did not pick up the key card. Not yet. The hegemony sent a formal notification to Earth 7 days after the New Hope seizure. It came through their standard diplomatic channel, a frequency they had assigned to humanity 8 years ago, after the first contact protocols, when the hegemony had formally cataloged Earth as a Class 3 developing civilization with limited interstellar capacity. The notification was one page. It stated, in the precise bureaucratic language that the hegemony used for such things, that New Hope colony had been placed under hegemony administrative jurisdiction, pending a sovereignty review that would take approximately 3 years, and that Earth's government was welcome to file a formal objection through the Interstellar Claims Arbitration Body, a process that typically concluded in 8 to 12 years. The implication was clear. The hegemony was not threatening. The hegemony was simply processing. Earth's response came through the same channel 3 days later. It was also one page. It said, "We acknowledge receipt of your notification. We are reviewing our options." That was all. The hegemony's diplomatic staff filed it under compliance confirmed and moved on. High Provost Vane was not informed. The response was too routine to escalate. Earth had done what species with Class 3 designations always did. They had acknowledged the reality of their situation and begun the slow process of accepting it. 14 years of silence had told the hegemony one thing about humanity. The silence that followed New Hope told them the same thing, louder. They were not wrong about the silence. They were wrong about what it meant. The propagation window closed on day 11. Vance was asleep when it happened, or as close to asleep as she got during active operations, which meant she was lying on the cot in the room adjacent to the server bay with her boots still on, the kind of rest that is more about horizontal than about unconscious. The alert that woke her was not an alarm. It was a single soft tone from the comm system, the one she had assigned to relay confirmations only, and she was sitting up before it finished. She read the message standing. Full propagation confirmed. Node count 4,217. Lattice penetration 98.3%. Dormancy stable. Zero detection flags across all monitored hegemony channels. Ledger is in position. She stood there for a moment with the screen in her hand. 4,217 nodes. Every ship in the Hrakthal operational fleet. Every command relay. Every communications hub in their territorial network. The same network they called the Central Lattice. The same network they had built over 1,200 years into the single most reliable military coordination system in the known galaxy. All of it running, right now, on top of a protocol that answered to a plain white key card on her desk. She set the screen down. She went and made coffee, hot this time. The ledger had not been built in a day, or a year, or even a decade. It had been built in the spaces between things, in the gaps left by the hegemony's certainty. The program had started not with Vance, but with a signals analyst named Dr. Osai Tambali, who had been studying the hegemony's lattice transmissions for 3 years before he noticed something that should not have been there. The lattice used a layered encryption architecture. The outer layer was formidable, built on math that Earth's best systems would have taken centuries to crack directly. But the inner routing protocol, the part that handled how packets moved between nodes, was built on a standard that was 60 years old. The hegemony had not upgraded it because there was no reason to upgrade what no one could attack from the outside. Tambali had put his observation in a report. The report had taken 8 months to reach Vance. She had read it on a Tuesday morning, in an office that smelled of old carpet and the coffee that perpetually burned in the break room down the hall, and she had read it 4 times before she set it down. The hegemony's routing layer was not just old. It was a variant of a packet switching standard that Earth had developed independently, 30 years before first contact, for use in legacy colonial relay systems. New Hope's comm network still ran it. So did 9 other colonies on the outer expansion lanes, because the protocol was stable and cheap and nobody had gotten around to replacing it. The hegemony had not noticed this. The hegemony had catalogued Earth's colonial comm infrastructure as obsolete and moved on. The idea that humanity had developed the same baseline routing standard independently, and that this might mean something, that possibility had not entered a single fractal intelligence file in 21 years of monitoring. Tambali had called his theoretical exploit the ledger because he was precise about language, and what he was proposing was, at its core, an accounting trick. A packet-switching exploit buried in the layer the hegemony never checked, dormant until activated, which would give the holder of a valid authentication key the ability to reroute, redirect, or freeze any command signal passing through the central lattice. Not from outside the lattice. From inside it, through the routing layer the hegemony had absorbed from humanity's own colonial infrastructure, without ever understanding what they were absorbing. Vance had taken the report to a group of 7 people. 3 of them had told her it was impossible. 2 had told her it would take 30 years. 1 had said nothing for a long time and then asked how many people would need to know. She had said 11 total. The 11th was Tambali, who by that point had already begun writing the code. The first 4 years were infrastructure. Not exciting infrastructure, the underground relay network, the line-of-sight laser links, the buried server capacity. Work done in sections by small teams, each team knowing only their piece. The cover was maintenance contracts, geological surveys, fiber optic upgrades for the colonial relay system. The hegemony monitored Earth's radio communications during this period and logged them as routine administrative traffic. They were not wrong. The administrative traffic was genuine. The laser links ran beneath it, invisible. Year 5 was the first injection attempt. It failed because Tambali's initial authentication bridge had a timing flaw. It would have triggered a lattice anomaly flag if deployed. He found the flaw on a Thursday, rewrote the bridge over a weekend, and did not sleep between Friday morning and Sunday night. Vance found him asleep at his desk on Monday and left him there because the rewritten bridge worked, and some things were worth the cost. Year 7 was the hardest. A senior hegemony administrator conducted a surprise audit of New Hope's relay infrastructure as part of a routine colonization compliance review. The audit team spent 6 days in the colony's comm hub. One of Tambali's injection nodes was 3 meters from where they set up their workstation. The audit team found nothing. The injection node looked like a cooling module for the server rack, because Tambali had built it inside a cooling module for the server rack. The hegemony's audit team were not looking for something that had been designed, from the first day, by people who knew exactly what the hegemony would and would not examine. The audit team filed their report. The New Hope relay infrastructure was assessed as obsolete but functional, no security concerns. The report was filed. The node stayed. Year 9 brought the first confirmed penetration. A single fractal cargo relay in the outer transit corridor had accepted the dormant protocol and begun routing a fraction of its handshake traffic through Tambali's bridge. It was less than 1% of one node's traffic. Vance had marked the date in the log. Year 12, 40% penetration. 40% of the operational fleet's command nodes were routing handshake traffic through the ledger's dormant layer, still invisible, still quiet, still waiting. Year 14 was the year Vane's fleet came to New Hope. Vance had not been surprised. The hegemony's resource survey of the outer lanes had been in progress for 3 years, and New Hope was the obvious next acquisition. She had known, with reasonable certainty, for 18 months that New Hope would be taken. She had told no one there, not the governor, not the colonial council. Telling them would have changed nothing except their behavior, and changed behavior was detectable. She had let it happen. That was the cost she had not written down in the log. There were other costs, the 11 people who had given a decade or more to program with no guarantee, the analysts who had burned out and been quietly reassigned, the 3 who had not reassigned but simply stopped coming to work one day, in the way that people stop when they have given what they had and found the bottom. She had written their names in a separate document, not a report, a list. Governor Thays was still in administrative detention. He did not know what was coming. He did not need to know yet. The hegemony in the 3 weeks after New Hope did what large systems do after a successful acquisition. They processed. They filed. They integrated the colony's infrastructure into the lattice and moved their attention to the next item on the agenda. The Outer Lane survey continued. 2 more colonies were flagged for review. Earth's one-page response had been routed to a mid-tier diplomatic processor and had not been escalated. High Provost Vane had returned to the Ascendant, his flagship, a vessel that the hegemony's records described as the most comprehensively lattice-integrated command platform in current operational use. Every system on the Ascendant ran through the central lattice. Navigation, weapons, life support, communications, the biometric locks on every command console. The lattice was not a tool on the Ascendant. The lattice was the ship. Vane was reviewing the next survey report when his senior intelligence officer, Sub-Provost Jareth, brought him a follow-up assessment on Earth. Vane read the first paragraph, which described Earth's continued silence on the New Hope matter, and tapped his console once. "File it," he said. Jareth took the assessment back. He did not file it immediately. He stood for a moment, because there was something in the assessment's secondary analysis that he had flagged himself, something about the pattern of Earth's sublight relay traffic in the weeks after New Hope that did not quite match the baseline they had on record. The variation was small, less than a standard deviation from the norm. He had flagged it because he flagged anomalies, not because he believed it meant anything. He looked at Vane's back. Vane had already moved on to the next item. Jareth filed the assessment. He would think about it again, later, much later, in circumstances he could not have predicted. But he filed it, and the moment passed, and the variation in Earth's relay traffic became one more line in a database that no one at the hegemony's intelligence directorate was actively watching. On day 22 after the New Hope seizure, Vance picked up the key card. She did not do anything with it. She held it between 2 fingers for a moment, looked at it and set it back down. But she had picked it up, which was the first time since Tambali had handed it to her, 7 years ago at the end of a very long day, saying this is the key, literally, and I recommend not losing it. She had laughed, which was unusual, and he had smiled, which meant the same thing. She pulled up the propagation report again. 98.3%, every node in the fleet. She checked the 6-day rolling average on the dormancy stability. Flat, invisible, no flags. She opened the laser relay, typed 3 words, confirm targeting parameters. The response came back in 14 seconds, all 4,217 nodes confirmed. Biometric locks live on Racthol command platforms. Navigation control active. Weapons systems accessible but flagged as final resort. Awaiting key authentication. She closed the channel, looked at the card. 22 days since New Hope, 14 years before that. She thought about Governor Thays in his detention room, probably reading whatever they had given him to read, waiting for a process that was supposed to take 3 years. She thought about the names on her list. She thought about the last transmission from New Hope, a routine shipping manifest, logged the morning before the fleet arrived, a list of cargo containers and their weights, the most ordinary document in the colonial records. That manifest's timestamp was the activation seed in the ledger's authentication protocol, the last ordinary thing New Hope had sent before the silence began. She set the card down again, but closer to her hand this time. The propagation window was closed. The nodes were in position. The question now was timing, and timing was the one thing Vance had always been careful about. She had not come this far by being impatient, but she had also not come this far by waiting longer than necessary. She picked up her pen and wrote one line in the physical log, the paper one, the one that had no network connection and lived in a locked drawer. Day 5132. Ready. Then she closed the drawer, picked up the key card and held it. She authenticated the key card at 300 hours on a Wednesday. Not because Wednesday meant anything, because the propagation window had been stable for 11 days and the stability curve had not moved in 72 hours, and Vance had learned over 14 years that waiting for a perfect moment was how you missed the window entirely. The card reader was a physical device, air-gapped, connected to nothing except the laser relay terminal beneath her desk. She slid the card in. The reader beeped once, soft and flat. A confirmation code appeared on the small screen above it, 16 characters, which she cross-checked against the printed copy in the locked drawer. They matched. She typed the confirmation into the laser relay, sent it. Then she sat back and waited, because what happened next would take time, and there was nothing more she could do to make it happen faster. On the Ascendant, High Provost Vane was reviewing shipping manifests. Not because shipping manifests were beneath him. In the Hegemony's administration, resource flow data was command data, and Vane had built his career on understanding that the empire that controlled logistics controlled everything else. He had a cup of something warm at the edge of his console. The bridge was quiet. His night staff moved between their stations with the efficient silence of people who had worked together long enough to not need words for routine operations. Sub-Provost Jareth was at his secondary station, running his standard end-of-cycle anomaly review. It was the kind of work that produced results approximately once every 8 months, which meant it was mostly the work of reviewing the absence of results. He had done it every cycle for 6 years. He did it without resentment, because he understood what the work was for. He was halfway through the review when the first fluctuation hit. It was small, a 0.3-second lag in the lattice handshake cycle from the navigation console, the kind of lag that could mean a firmware refresh, a cooling issue in the relay module, a dozen other routine causes. Jareth flagged it and kept moving. The second fluctuation came 4 minutes later, same duration, different console. He stopped. Vane was still reading the shipping manifest. He had not noticed either fluctuation, because they were below the threshold that triggered automatic alerts, and because the lattice had never, in 1,200 years of operational history, produced a pattern like this from a non-routine cause. Jareth pulled up the lag pattern and looked at it for 30 seconds. Then he said, "High Provost." Vane did not look up immediately. He finished the line he was reading, which was his habit, and then he turned. "What?" "I have 2 sequential handshake lags, separate consoles, 4-minute spacing. I'd like to run a lattice diagnostic." Vane looked at him for a moment. The look was not skeptical. It was the look of someone who had run many diagnostics that produced the same result. "Run it." Jareth ran it. The diagnostic came back in 11 seconds, all systems nominal, lattice integrity confirmed, no anomalies detected. He stared at the result. The lags were in the log. The diagnostic said they were not there. That was not possible unless the diagnostic itself was returning a false result, which was not possible because the diagnostic ran on the lattice and the lattice was incorruptible. He was still staring at this contradiction when every light on the bridge went out. Not dimmed, not flickered, out. The emergency lighting came on 3 seconds later, red, the flat functional red of systems that were designed to be visible but not comfortable. In that 3-second gap, the only light on the bridge had been the glow of the consoles, and then the consoles had gone dark too, one by one, in a sequence that moved from port to starboard like something deliberate. Vane was standing. He did not remember standing, but he was. The emergency lighting showed him his bridge crew frozen at their stations, looking at dead screens. Jareth had both hands flat on his console. The navigation officer, a senior commander named Holt, was reaching for a manual override panel on the wall, the physical backup that existed precisely for moments like this, and the panel's indicator light was not green. It was dark. "Restore lattice connection," Vane said. His voice was level, he was good at level. High Provost, Holt did not turn around. Navigation is not responding. Weapons. Checking, a pause, no response. Communications. Silence from the communication station. Vane pressed his palm to the biometric lock on his command console. The console's authentication light blinked once slowly and stayed dark. He pressed his palm again. The same single blink. Dark. He had never seen that happen. In 31 years on Hrackthal command platforms, biometric authentication had never failed. The system was not designed to fail. It was designed to authenticate or deny, not to simply stop. Jareth, he said. Running secondary diagnostic. Jareth's voice had gone very flat, the flatness of someone who was processing something they did not have a category for. High Provost, the secondary diagnostic is returning nominal. All systems nominal. The lattice is reporting full integrity. The bridge was dark and silent, and the lattice was reporting full integrity and nothing was working. Vane looked at his dead console. He looked at the dark biometric panel. He thought, with the precise and practiced mind of a commander who had navigated 400 system acquisitions, about what kind of event produced this specific combination of symptoms: complete system loss, false diagnostic return, biometric failure, lattice reporting healthy. He did not have an answer. He did not have an answer because this combination did not exist in Hrackthal operational history. It had no category. There was no protocol for it because no one had ever written a protocol for something that was not possible. He was still processing this when every screen on the bridge came back on. All of them at once, displaying the same image. A human woman sitting at a desk looking at the camera, plain clothing. A mug beside her, something hot, a thin thread of steam. She looked, Vane thought, like someone who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time and had decided not to make anything of it. She said, "High Provost Vane, my name is Director Elena Vance. I represent the Earth Sovereignty Directorate. I apologize for the disruption to your morning." She did not sound sorry. "We have been monitoring your lattice. You seem to have made an error in your arithmetic." A brief pause, the kind that was not uncertainty but emphasis. "We are not a footnote. We are the ink." Vane's first instinct was to cut the transmission. He turned to the communications officer and said, "Kill it." And the communications officer tried, and nothing happened, and the woman on every screen continued to look at him with the same patient attention. His second instinct was to reach for his console and override manually, and his hand remembered before his mind did that the console did not answer to his hand right now. His third instinct was the one that mattered. He began to calculate. The lattice was reporting nominal. The lattice had absorbed New Hope's infrastructure 23 days ago. New Hope's infrastructure had used an old packet switching standard that his technical staff had assessed as obsolete. The assessment had been filed. He had approved the integration. The diagnostic had returned nominal. He stopped. New Hope's packet switching standard. His technical team's assessment had said obsolete. It had not said empty. It had not said inert. It had said obsolete, which meant outdated, which was not the same thing as harmless, and Vane understood in the space between one breath and the next that he had approved the absorption of a delivery mechanism without examining what it was delivering. 98.3%. He did not know that number, but he would later. He would learn it from Jareth's after-action report, which would describe the ledger's penetration rate, and which Vane would read 4 times the way someone reads a document that keeps changing meaning. Right now, on his bridge, what he knew was simpler and worse. The woman on his screens had been inside his network, and his network had told him, every time he asked, that it was fine. "Director Vance," he said, the level voice. He was still good at level even now. "What do you want?" On her screen in the underground facility, Vance watched him ask the question. She had run this conversation many times in the years of preparation, not scripted, because she did not believe in scripts but mapped. She knew what he would ask, in what order, and she knew what she was going to say. She picked up the mug, drank, set it down. "What I want," she said, "is straightforward. New Hope Colony is released from administrative jurisdiction within 24 hours. Governor Thays and his staff are returned to civilian status. Your fleet withdraws from the outer lane survey entirely, and the survey vessels leave our transit corridor. In exchange, the access we currently hold over your lattice remains dormant. You keep your ships. Your network stays intact. Your empire continues." She looked at him steadily. "If you do not comply, we will demonstrate what the access looks like when it is not dormant. I would prefer not to do that. I suspect you would prefer that I not do that either." Vane's expression had not changed. He was, she thought, either very controlled or very good at looking controlled. She was betting on the former. "You are holding 4,000 ships," he said. "We are holding 4,217 ships," she said. "Yes." "And you are asking for one colony and a withdrawal." "We are asking for what was taken. We are not asking for more." There was a silence on the bridge. Vance could see, behind Vane, the navigation officer standing very still. Jareth, at his station, looking at something on his screen that was not the diagnostic. "I need time to consult," Vane said. "You have 24 hours, Vance said. "Starting now." She looked at the camera for one more moment. "The lattice will remain in its current state until you comply or until the deadline passes. I would encourage your technical staff not to attempt to patch the routing layer. They will find the access is not in the routing layer. It is in the layer beneath the routing layer, which does not appear on your architecture diagrams because we inserted it before you integrated our network. Every patch attempt will be logged. The log will inform our assessment of your intentions." She reached forward and closed the channel. The screens on the Ascendant's bridge went dark for 3 seconds. Then they came back on ship systems, navigation, everything restored, normal, fully operational, as if nothing had happened. Which was, Vance had decided years ago, the most frightening part of what they had built. Not the takeover, the restoration. The fact that they could give it back and take it again and give it back, and the hegemony would never know which state it was actually in. Jareth filed 6 reports in the next 4 hours. The first was to the Lattice Integrity Team, requesting a full architectural audit. The second was to Hegemony Intelligence, flagging the Earth anomaly he had noted 3 weeks ago and filed without escalating. The third was to Vane's senior staff, requesting emergency consultation. The fourth, fifth, and sixth were increasingly urgent versions of the second. None of the audits found anything. The architectural review returned nominal. The routing layer looked exactly as it always had, because the layer Tambali had built sat beneath it, in a space the hegemony's own architecture diagrams did not map, because the diagrams had been drawn before the integration of New Hope's packet-switching infrastructure, and no one had updated them afterward. Vane spent 12 of the 24 hours in consultation. He spoke to his senior commanders, his intelligence staff, 2 members of the hegemony's High Council who were available on short notice. The conversation was the same conversation each time. They could not verify the extent of the access. They could not patch what they could not locate, and any attempt to physically disable the affected nodes would require taking the fleet offline in sections, which would take weeks, and which would not work because the exploit was not in the nodes. It was in the protocol the nodes ran. 12 hours in, one of his senior commanders suggested that Earth might be bluffing, that the brief takeover had been a single-instance demonstration, a one-shot capability, and that the actual penetration depth was less than claimed. Vane looked at the commander for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "She told us exactly what she had. She told us where it was not, and she was right. She told us what she wanted, and it was less than we expected. What part of that behavior suggests bluffing to you?" The commander did not answer. Vane went back to his console, which was working now perfectly, the way it always had. He tapped it once. The 24 hours ended at 300 the following Wednesday, exactly. Vane's compliance notice arrived 9 minutes early, routed through the same diplomatic channel the hegemony had used to notify Earth of New Hope's seizure 4 weeks before. It was 3 pages this time. The hegemony would release New Hope Colony from administrative jurisdiction, effective immediately. Governor Thays and his staff would be returned to civilian status within 6 hours. The Outer Lane Survey Fleet would withdraw from the corridor within 72 hours. Vance read it once. She did not read it 4 times, the way she read most things. Some documents only needed to be understood once. She typed a single line back, confirmed. The access remains dormant as promised. She did not say more than that. She had learned in 14 years of planning for this exact moment that the temptation to say more, to gloat, to lecture, to make the hegemony feel the full weight of what had almost happened to them, was a temptation that cost nothing to resist and everything to indulge. Restraint was not the absence of power. It was power that had decided not to spend itself. Governor Thays was released from detention at 8:47 local time. He walked out of the administrative building into ordinary daylight, blinking, and the first thing he did was ask what had happened. No one told him for 3 more days, and when they finally did, it was Vance herself, on a secure line, speaking to a man she had allowed to sit in a detention cell for 3.5 weeks without a single word of warning. She did not apologize for that. She explained it once plainly. Telling him would have changed his behavior, and changed behavior would have been visible to people who were watching for exactly that kind of change. He listened. He did not thank her. He asked one question, whether it had been worth it, and she said that was not a question she was equipped to answer for anyone but herself, and for herself, yes. There was a girl on New Hope named Myra Akontiash, 11 years old, whose mother had been one of the governor's senior aides and had spent the 3 weeks in the same detention wing as Thays. Myra had not been told anything either. She had gone to a neighbor's house each night and asked, every night, when her mother was coming home. On the day of the release, she was standing at the edge of the administrative building's perimeter with a hand-drawn sign that said nothing political, nothing about sovereignty or empires. Just her mother's name in block letters, the kind of sign made by someone who did not yet understand the scale of what had almost happened, and only understood that she wanted her mother to see it first, before anything else. Her mother saw it first. Vance had a copy of the security footage. She watched it once at her desk with the physical log open beside her. Then she wrote the date and closed the log and did not watch it again. Some things you kept once was enough. Jareth's after-action report was completed 19 days after the ultimatum. It ran to 400 pages and concluded correctly that the ledger had achieved full fleet penetration through a routing layer protocol embedded in absorbed colonial infrastructure, that no existing Fractal diagnostic architecture could detect its presence, because the diagnostics themselves ran through the compromised layer, and that the anomaly he had personally flagged and filed 3 weeks before the takeover had been the earliest available signal of the intrusion. He included that fact about himself. He did not have to. Vane read that section twice, the only section of the report he read twice, and said nothing about it to Jareth directly, which Jareth understood correctly as the closest thing to acknowledgement he was going to receive. The hegemony's High Council convened an emergency session 6 weeks later to decide how to formally classify Earth going forward. The debate lasted 4 days. Vane was asked to give testimony. He described the bridge, the lights, the false nominal diagnostic, the woman on every screen. He was asked, near the end, whether he believed Earth's demonstrated restraint, the fact that they had taken everything and given it back, and asked for almost nothing indicated weakness or strength. They held 4,217 ships, he said, and they returned every one of them without firing a shot, because they had already made their point by not needing to. He paused. I do not believe there is a category for that in our doctrine. I recommend we build one. The Council's final classification, filed 8 weeks after New Hope, replaced Earth's designation of Class 3 developing civilization with a new entry that had no precedent in hegemony records: the Silent Architect. Threat assessment: unknown. Recommended posture: non-engagement. 22 years later, a hegemony archivist named SciFi, who had not been born when the ledger first went dormant in New Hope's relay network, was compiling the official historical record of the Hrack-Earth relationship for the Central Archive. She interviewed a retired sub-provost, an old man now, who had once served as an intelligence officer on the Ascendant. She asked him what it had been like that morning. Jareth, because it was Jareth, decades removed from the bridge, his voice slower now but the flatness still there, the same flatness he'd had when he first stared at a diagnostic that lied to him, was quiet for a moment before he answered. We had spent 12 centuries, he said, assuming that a civilization's threat could be measured by the size of its fleet. We looked at humanity's ships and saw nothing worth counting. We never once asked what they might have already built inside ours. He looked past her, at something that was not in the room. The frightening thing was never the 4,000 ships. It was that they could give them back and take them again and give them back, and we would never know which state we were actually in. They did not need the ships. They needed us to know they could have them at any time forever, and then simply choose not to. The archivist asked what the hegemony had called them in that first classification. Jareth almost smiled. It did not quite arrive. You mean that wasn't their full arm?